So this week we have Mr. Sourav Roy, who's a very distinguished person introduced to us by Mr. Muthuraman. So he's a Tata Steel prodigy and protege of probably Mr. Muthuraman from those days. So I'll request Mr. Muthuraman to introduce him, and then Saurabh can start off.
Yeah, just a couple of words. I'm sure all of you are aware that the tribal population in India is in excess of 100 million, which is something like 8 to 9% of the total population. But in spite of such a huge population and large numbers, and India being the home for the largest tribal population, the rest of the population don't know much about the tribals. We don't know much about tribal art, tribal culture, tribal music, the way that we could integrate them into society. A lot of times we take wrong decisions. But there are companies and institutions like Tata Steel who work with them almost on a day-to-day basis. And we have had a 100-year relationship with tribals, and therefore we, I think a little bit to some extent more than others, understand tribals better. So we have today to talk on the subject Sourav Roy, who's actually an economics graduate from Delhi University, if I remember correctly. And he is IIM Ahmedabad. Unfortunately, Prashad is not here today, but he is IIM Ahmedabad graduate. And he joined Tata Steel in 2007 and worked in several areas. He was in mergers and acquisition, he was in strategy, he was in finance. But finally, he chose what sort of he liked best, which is working with the society. He is the head of the corporate social responsibility function of Tata Steel, which is the largest function amongst all corporate. He heads the entire Tata Steel group, where we have got some 6 people. So over to Sourav. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Incidentally, Sourav, if I may just add one more. Please. Saurav's wife, Purnima, also works. She's a XLRA business management graduate, topper in AS, just like Sourav is, Tata Administrative Service, and both of them work in the societal area of Tata Steel. One works for the group, which is Purnima, and one works for Tata Steel, which is Sourav Roy. Come, Sourav.
Thank you, sir. And seeing all of you, I'm missing her by my side today. I think she would have added a lot of value. Just to check, am I audible? Visible?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So first of all, thank you for having me here today. I think what we're going to talk about, or rather, what I'm going to share about, is more in the nature of, starting a conversation. And I think it's a complex issue of, many factors, many things that go in, many things that have gone wrong, many things that are happening right. It's a sort of pan-India kind of issue. What I will try today is, just present a holistic sort of picture of where we are and what, why tribal identity as a construct is important. What really is tribal identity? I will speak a little bit about, what we have been doing on the issue of tribal identity. But I will speak about our work in two contexts. One is because a lot of what I'm going to say, the understanding has come from what we've been doing in the time that we spent. And second also is, I think a lot of what we are trying to do and what the issues that we're working on, the aspects that we're working on, actually represent what is this whole composite thing called identity, which is a little distinct from having programs in education or programs in public healthcare, which are the conventional development programs. So if I have about 15 slides, and I'll just take a second to put them up. And from a format perspective, if it's okay, I'll just quickly run through what I have to say, and then maybe we can have a conversation around. And of course, if there are any views or any questions, in the middle, is very welcome. If you can just give me a second, let me just start sharing my screen. Right. Just to check if I hope the screen is visible now.
It's
Yes,
visible.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Right. So first of all, Johar. Johar to all of you. Thank you. Johar is the conventional Adivasi greeting in large parts of central and east India. There are many versions of this. This is, I think, the conventional belief in tribal communities is that when you say Johar, you invoke the entire all the positivity, all the respect, all the wisdom that nature affords you. Put that into one word and sort of transfer that to whoever you're paying your respect to. So it's a word that is used to greet guests. It's a word that is used to pay the final respects to the departed. And it's a word of respect. So Johar, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. Uh, so a lot of what I'm going to share with you comes out of an effort that we have sort of very carefully crafted over the last 6 years now, called Samvaad, which is essentially a platform for dialogue, which has taken different shapes, and the sort of underlying intent or the line that we sort of stick to is more power to our tribes. Today, the little time that we had, I thought we could look at this in two parts. Uh, let me just first give you a brief overview of who are we really talking about when we say tribes, when we say indigenous communities in India, and then go to this phrase of more power to. Why is it required? And what has been the narrative till now? So
Could you leave your video on, please? It's. I mean, we can see your face then, so it's much more.
Shivu, I'll
Is it
try to do that. 1 second. I'm not sure if I can share the screen and keep my video on. That's the problem.
Yes, yes. It will come on.
You can see me now?
It's gone.
Not sure why your video isn't coming up here.
Just give me a second. Okay, now
Without doing anything further, just share screen. Then it should come up. I think both should be there.
can you still see me?
No, it went off. I'm not sure what happened. Okay, doesn't matter. I guess
Okay,
something.
let's
Yeah.
yeah. Just yes. Is the slide visible at least?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, so let's just look at give a quick sense of who are we talking about when we say our tribes, and then get into the the larger narrative of what we're talking about. So we talk of scheduled tribes. Scheduled tribes are I mean, scheduled tribes came into being. The concept of scheduled tribes came to being with the constitution of the country. So there's Article 366 and Article 342, which combined set out what these schedules are and who are these scheduled tribal communities, who are the scheduled tribes. And if you look at the constitutional definition of scheduled tribes, they are pivoted around a distinctive culture and way of life as a group, and they are pivoted around geographic isolation. And we will try and explore both of these as we go by. So that's the definition of who scheduled tribes are, as per the Indian Constitution. Now let's look at who are these tribes and what are the numbers we are talking about. So as of date, there are 705 scheduled tribes in India. Okay, and then this number has, I mean, there's when the constitution was drafted, this number was at about 698, and there are only about 7 tribes who have been added in since then to this list. Now, these 705 tribes, scheduled tribes in India, have add up to a population of about 104 million, as Mr. Muthuran was just mentioning right at the beginning. These 104 million people constitute about 8.6% of the total population of India. These numbers that I'm giving you are census 2011 numbers. There's a high likelihood that these numbers might be slightly on the higher side, because one of the popular issues with the 2011 census, and we've seen that play out very strongly in certain parts of the country, is that large parts of scheduled tribes have actually been left out of the counting in the 2011 census. So this number actually, what we say 8.6%, is probably closer to 9% of the total population. And if you just take 104 million people and just put them together, the indigenous population of the scheduled tribes in India together would constitute the 14th largest country in the world by population. That's India is also the country with the largest indigenous population in the world. It is not Australia, it is not Canada, it is not any of the other countries where the indigenous narrative is much stronger globally than the indigenous narrative in India. And that's probably because in Australia or in Canada, the number of tribes or the number of indigenous communities are not that high. India has the highest diversity as well as the highest numbers and the highest number of people as far as indigenous population, indigenous communities, or tribal communities are concerned. So this is the canvas that we're talking about, if you will. Now the next question is, where are the tribes of India? I mean, where are they located? Let me try and I'm sure this is visible. So if you see by population, the map on the left, they're not really localized. The tribes of India are not localized to a particular part of the country. I think it's very important for us to remember that, the tribes, scheduled tribes or indigenous communities have been living in the country from the time when geopolitical boundaries did not exist. So today, if we say, let's say the Bhil community, which is the largest scheduled tribe in India by population, it is actually factually incorrect to say that the Bhil community is from Madhya Pradesh, or to say that the Santhal community is from Jharkhand, because Jharkhand or Madhya Pradesh came later. The Bhil communities were living in that part of the country from much earlier. So if you see the map on the left, it's color coded. The sort of brownish color is in the northeast part of the country, are where more than 50% of the population of those states are scheduled tribes. And as you can see, at Punjab and Haryana are the only states where there are no indigenous communities. Otherwise, the entire country has scheduled tribes living there. And one of the things that we when we do our work take away from this is that the tribal identity narrative therefore cannot really be a state narrative. It has to purpose be a national narrative while taking care of local nuances. And what you see on the right, the map on the right, the Constitution of India defines a fifth schedule and a sixth schedule. So the fifth schedule areas and the sixth schedule areas. Sixth schedule and these areas are, we spoke of geographic isolation earlier. These are the areas where the sixth schedule areas are the areas which have the highest density of tribal population in the country, and the fifth schedule areas are let's say a level lesser than that in terms of population density of tribal communities. And since the Constitution identifies this, there are special provisions for fifth schedule areas, sixth schedule areas, including how the Panchayati Raj Act cascades, how there are tribal subplans for budgetary allocation in each of these fifth and sixth schedule areas, and that's the connotation. So this is just to give you a sense of where the tribes are, and what is the canvas of indigenous communities or tribes in the country. So now so this is who who our tribes are. Now let's come to this context of why are we talking of more power, or any other phrase that anyone will be comfortable with. Why talk of indigenous communities? Why talk of tribes? And why talk of tribal identity in specific, since that's what we're going to speak about. Let's begin with putting some numbers to the obvious. Okay, what has happened is these are some of the key indices of the country. None of these numbers are older than say 2011. The census numbers are the last numbers. Most of these numbers are from between, say, 2013 to 2018. This looks at these key indices and looks at the manifestation of these indices in scheduled tribes and then non-tribal populations. I've selected a few, but if you actually look across the board, this is the reality. Whether you look at below poverty line percentages, whether you look at literacy rates, dropout rates, any of the conventional things that we look at, life expectancy, there is significantly lower manifestation or inferior manifestation among scheduled tribes as compared to non-tribal populations. And then so the question thereby that we need to grapple with is that why is this the reality? What is really happened? And we'll come and discuss this in a bit. The other piece that needs to be
yes. Saurav, can I just stop you for a minute?
Please.
This non-tribal population, does it also include the urban population?
Yes, it includes. It also includes urban population.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Sort of one more question. What is tertiary sector occupation?
Tertiary sector is the informal sector occupation.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. The other reality of tribal populations is displacement, and that is often sort of let's just say not spoken about and not confronted or not seen in its entirety. But I think which this is a reality that needs to be accepted. Between 1951 and between 1951 and 1999, there were 50 million, almost 50 million people who were internally displaced in India. I mean, we're not even counting the last 20 years. We're not even, when a lot of the creation of national assets, etc., had stepped up. But if you just look at that 40-year gap, almost 50 million people were internally displaced. 40% of the above are from the scheduled tribes. Okay, whereas if you compare that to 8.6% of the total population, I mean, 8.6% of the total population are scheduled tribes, but almost 5x, 40% of the people who are displaced actually come from scheduled tribes. So clearly there is a disconnect there at a very macro level if you just look at displacement numbers. Okay, and I just want to say that displacement and voluntary migration numbers are different numbers. These do not include voluntary migration numbers. These are displacement numbers. I'm very happy to share some of this literature with you later in case it intrigues or interests you. But here are some hard facts. We spoke about scheduled areas right before this. So 38% of India's forest cover is in the scheduled areas. Okay, and if you compare the forest cover in scheduled areas to the forest cover in non-scheduled areas, there's almost a 2.5x forest to land cover intensity. Forest cover to land intensity. So clearly the richest natural resources or richest manifestations of nature happen in where indigenous communities lie. So that's one reality. 70% of India's operational mines are in scheduled areas, and they account roughly for about 65% of the total mineral production. And finally, if you see large projects, and I just picked up dams as an example. 40%, that number is actually closer to 41%, but 41% of India's current dams are in scheduled areas, including 59 assets of national importance. And these are, this number is as of 2018, and there have been several other announcements in the last 2.5 years. So, and most of those announcements, as you may have tracked in the news, are either in Upper Maharashtra or in Arunachal or in the Northeast, which are the Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 areas. So, this is what the picture looks like. The reason I wanted to put this out there is because often, there's a large segment of population which looks at displacement as a dirty word. Displacement is something that shouldn't be spoken about, or let's not go there. But if you really want to understand and have a holistic view and deeper understanding, nuanced understanding of tribal identity and what really other factors influencing development, factors influencing identity, then I think displacement is something that we need to bring into the conversation, need to accept it, and then start the conversation. Uh, so, uh, so as we said, I think if you look at development indices, there has obviously been a situation where tribal communities have sort of been either marginalized or not understood well enough. As a consequence, the manifestations are inferior, and clearly they've been at the wrong end of displacement for various reasons. Now, this is an interesting slide, and I'm going to spend a little time on this. And I was thinking whether I should speak about this or not, but I thought, with this group, I should leave this thought with you, and maybe we can have a debate thereafter. Now, we spoke about development. We spoke about development, displacement, and multiple things. I wanted to, before we get into speaking about tribal identity, what really is the bridge between identity and development? Why is identity and development so important, and what has the narrative been? So this is a very sort of macro picture of how this intertwining of identity and development has evolved for Adivasis or for indigenous communities in India. So if you look at large parts of the when we were a British colonial state, the approach towards tribal development was essentially identity-based isolation. If you are forest dwellers, stay in the forests, and then there were large sort of exclusionary policies, if you will, and they were just off the radar. So the community's identity as a tribal community clearly, sort of kept them away from the mainstream completely and there were many ethnological, ethnographic, anthropological sort of surveys, assessments, which actually propagated this piece. So even now, a lot of the history and the way history has been written, sort of, pre-independence, if you will, there are, just to give you an example, many people, and rightly so, speak about Jallianwala Bagh today. But just, I'm in Jamshedpur right now, just about, 50 to 60 kilometers from here, there's a place called Kharsawang, where on the 1st of January, about 35 years ago, 35 years before Jallianwala Bagh, there was something called a Kharsawang Kand, where almost 1,100 people were gunned down in a similar fashion. But no one talks about it because the British historians haven't captured it, and there are multiple issues. So that was the reality when we were a British colonial state. From this identity-based isolation piece, when the Constituent Assembly debate started, and if you beyond the Constitution, if you actually read the Constituent Assembly debates, there was a mix. Identity-based isolation did not really go out, but there was also this, emphasis on development through integration. Bring them into the mainstream. Just get them into the mainstream, and everything will be okay. And let's get them into the cities. Let's get them into and that was the large part of the debate was drafting of the Constitution was based on that. And that was the essential conflict. If you read the Constitutional Assembly debates between, let's say, Jaipal Singh Munda and Ambedkar at one end, and then there was other other sort of luminaries in that piece. But that was the narrative. So again, identity had started playing a role, and this was the first time a development identity, a development model, and an identity-based model started sort of clashing with each other. Interacting with each other. 40 years after independence, still about 1990, and I'm speaking in broad swathes, so don't, the year is not that important, the period is more important. Largely the approach was development through integration. As I said earlier, if there is a public health model, the same public health model is going to work everywhere. If there's a public education model, the same public education model is going to work everywhere. So the fact that there might be very, very strong cultural and identity nuances which not just set apart, but define the way of life, the tribal way of life, did not find any conversation or any sort of place in the development narrative of the country. And if you also sort of map back a lot of the the asks for different states, the asks for Chhattisgarh, the asks for Jharkhand as separate states, the asks for, the entire Nilgiri areas of Tamil Nadu and the entire movement around that, the Dangs in Gujarat, and so a lot of sort of unrest over there. I think this was the primary cause of this unrest because the nuance of identity wasn't taken into account. 1999 was when something called the Ministry of Tribal Affairs was set up for the first time. I think gradually there was an understanding, and this understanding coincided with the 1993 introduction of the 73rd and 74th Amendment, which led to grassroots administration, the Panchayati Raj Act and the Urban Local Bodies introductions. Largely as a consequence of decentralizing governance, an understanding that emerged was this whole concept of nuance. Because when Panchayati Raj PRI institutions were being set up, I think the country and the sort of development thinkers, policy articulators, planning commission of the time had a very strong understanding that listen, grassroots governance is not really going to work in tribal areas because the nuances, the identity-led nuances are just so strong and different, and that's why there was one of the reasons contributed to the formation of a separate Ministry of Tribal Affairs at that time. And also there was the PESA Act, the FRA, the Forest Rehabilitation Acts, also taking into account different grassroots mechanisms for Schedule 5, Schedule 6 areas and tribal communities. So I'm sorry, this is a slightly heavy slide for a 7:30 p.m. Saturday conversation, but I think this is where identity and development have always played a role, and I will come to what we see as manifestations of this. So we moved from identity-based isolation to identity-based development, which is happening now, but there's been a whole journey where the concept of identity, a concept of uniqueness of a tribal way of life was just not taken into account. And that has led to a lot of angst within communities. So just to sort of summarize what I'm saying, identity therefore has become a source of strife and diffidence. And that's what we see every day, where a young tribal boy or girl will not opt for a higher job or a higher degree, or will just because हम तो आदिवासी हैं, हमको रहने दीजिए, आदिवासी से नहीं होगा. That was diffidence. That was the case till a few years earlier, and now we see as there's more information, more opportunities are becoming a little more democratic because of internet and multiple other things. It is actually becoming a strife because this understanding that there has been exclusion or there has been an issue, and therefore, languages are not being conserved. The official language census of the country says that 1,013 languages of the country have actually, a strong word would have actually vanished in the last 30 odd years. And this is done by Ganesh Devi about 4 years ago. And of these, about almost 60% of the dialects of the languages, which are apparently now not in circulation anymore, were oral dialects and were from tribal communities. So if any of us on this, on the conversation today, if we suddenly feel that, the language we identify as with, I'm a Bengali, in my case, if Bengali just dies out, and it's something that was a part of my life and it's just not around anywhere, that will obviously be a source of strife or a difference. And then that's something that we need to understand. So there's social discrimination, there's a conflict in development paradigm, geographic isolation. It is still a fact that the last mile services, public services, do not reach the most isolated areas of the country, and the most isolated areas of the country invariably are the Schedule 5 or the Schedule 6 areas. Even within a state, even within a reasonably developed state, if you look at the areas which are actually in the blind spot, there's a good chance that those areas are actually the tribal areas of the state. So there is geographic isolation, and there's also very limited true representation in the political and the policy articulation forum for tribal community rights. So this part of what I've said is the bad news, right? So to say, or is where we commiserate with tribal communities, if you will. But that's not the entire story. Uh, as I said, identity becomes a source of strife and difference, but it really should not be, since they actually hold the answers. So, here's a word. I mean, this is more a belief than fact. And if you indulge me with this, please, uh, you know, sustainability is a word all of us now understand and know and identify with. It's something that I have worked with for at least several years of my life, creating sustainability strategies and all of that. The point I'm trying to make is this: if sustainability, if you really strip it of all jargon, if you really look at what sustainability is, not from an industrial or company context, but from the planet's context, it basically talks of a genuine regard for what nature has endowed us with, and a genuinely empathetic society, which is where people are with each other, the community living concept. And my submission to all of you is, if you really look hard enough, then that is exactly what indigenous, the tribal way of life is, where you have a genuine regard for nature, where you have, you hold the key to sustaining what nature has endowed you with, and you have uh, codified social practices, codified community practices, which allow communities to be with each other, independent of political boundaries, geographic boundaries, and whatever you will. So the reason we need to work with tribal communities, not just because they've been left out, but that's also because they need to be worked with. They're the original naturalists, they're the original collectivizers, and they are the original culturists. And if in our everyday race to do something with technology, do something with digital, if we forget the fact that these little gems exist, and then which holds answers, then I think we are going fundamentally wrong somewhere. And also sometimes these answers are not in a format where all of us understand. They will not, the answers won't come to us in a fast food format. They may not be available to us in a PowerPoint presentation. They may not be available to us on an Excel sheet, or as the case might be. But it's for us to immerse ourselves in dialogue on identity and development, to understand these answers to sustainability can't uh, be lost along with tribal identity. Now, when we look at identity, I've been using that word, but it's a slightly complicated word. It's really not. It's an amalgam of many things. If you just look within ourselves, I mean, our own identity is not really. It's a, as a community, it's an amalgam of many things, as I said. I think so. Uh, there's language at the center of it. There's the historical context, what kind of icons exist, who's your heroes, your art forms, what are the social norms, your clothes, what festivals are being celebrated, uh, faith, what kind of faith exists in the communities, who are you worshiping, uh, governance norms, traditional governance norms. So it's an amalgam of many things. And as we've been grappling with this for the last several years, particularly through Samvaad for the last 6-7 years, I think the one biggest lesson that we've had is, it's not measurable, but one can definitely sort of feel it and, create a conversation around it for identity to be uh, strengthened. Uh, I have just, maybe 2 or 3 more slides, and then we'll open it up for conversation. But this is what I meant by more power to our tribes. I mean, there's a clear case to work on identity now that we sort of get a sense of who and where our tribes really are. Just 2 more slides. I think what we're doing in Samvaad, the reason I'm sharing this is because I think these are sort of shared objectives, which this has gone through a huge process of refinement, community endorsement, and that's why I'm sort of putting it out here. These are the 5 objectives with which we are running a sort of identity program. The first is, just creating a platform, as all of you will appreciate, where, and I mean, what we're doing today is a great example of that. Creating a common platform where communities just come together is worth doing by itself. I can assure you that, so when I see a youngster from Odisha come up to me during a Samvaad and telling me, Saurav, मुझे तो पता ही नहीं था कि नॉर्थ ईस्ट में भी ट्राइब्स हैं, and someone from Tamil Nadu saying, "अरे लद्दाख तो अमीरों का जगह है, लद्दाख में भी tribes हैं." So this whole, we said 104 million people, 8.6%. Unless that collectivization happens, it's very difficult to, really get a non-ghettoized narrative going for that. It's just creating a common platform, the collective wisdom under one roof. Um, as we spoke about, preserving a body of knowledge, and more importantly, a worldview that really runs the risk of being obliterated. Uh, we don't claim to solve issues on Samvaad. We just claim to understand the issues and the angst, because I think for a long while this has not been happening. Solving happens, we are just there as a platform, and solving, we've seen, I mean, maybe on a separate conversation, happy to share examples, but we've seen solving happens only when you just start this dialogue. And I think there are some outstanding models, that have worked. I think there are the number of, I'll give you an example. For instance, there are 3 national parks in the northeastern part of the country, and tiger reserves in South India, where there were tribal communities which were which were poaching communities by the legal definition of poaching. There are entire species and entire areas which are identified by UNESCO as endangered sites for species conservation. These communities, without any external help, without any NGO coming in, without any government narrative or push or thing, decided that when they were informed, when they got to know that. So let's take the Manas National Park in Assam. Manas National Park, when the communities, three tribal communities staying within the Manas Forest National Park, were told that on a global forum, global platform, the Manas National Park, their forest has been recognized as an endangered site and is listed among the top 30 endangered sites in the world. This was about 11 years ago. This very same community which used to poach animals, elephants and tigers, this borders Kaziranga, they said that, listen, enough, we have to do something about it because this is our forest. Sirs and ma'ams, without any external intervention, the same people who used to poach have now became conservators. And over a period of about 9 years, if you now go to the UNESCO website, the Manas National Park is not there. And after about 9 years of community effort, without any external help, UNESCO came and did their own assessment and said, I'm sorry, I mean, as per our very, very scientific methods, this is not an endangered site anymore. We wonder how it happened. And this entire model was, again, as I keep saying, that it is just a community-led model where the tribes of Manas Forest felt that no, this is, it's a matter of, I mean, we own, it is, ye jungle hamara hai, ye Manas Forest hamara hai, humko kuch karna hai, we have to do something about it. And that's how, this transformation came about. Now, these models somewhere we don't read about, and the people who are doing this, we don't read about. So just mutual role modeling and just putting it out, because of Manas, in Samvaad, now in the Bandipur Tiger Reserve and in Page, there are 2 or 3 youngsters who are now starting to form their own groups, saying that, why would our forest need to be declared a national park? We should just conserve it ourselves. So, that kind of change sometimes gets sparked purely through conversation. This is my last one. How do we do Samvaad? We basically look at this in 3 broad parts. It's 13-part ecosystem. The first part, as I said, we're just creating platforms to bring people together. There's this one central Samvaad conclave, which happens, till now it has happened in Jamshedpur. We now wanted to take out this grand conclave here. The other, the point of having it in Jamshedpur also is because we want Jamshedpur to be a city too, which is conscious of its history and heritage, and then on where we stay. I've done 3 years of my schooling from Jamshedpur, and I finished class 10 from Jamshedpur. I can assure you, when I left Jamshedpur after class 10, I had no idea of the tribal heritage of Jharkhand. It was Bihar at that time. Mujhe idea hi nahi tha. I thought every tribe in the country, every Adivasi is called Santhali. So it's not okay. I mean, a city cannot be, if a city is not conscious of its roots or history and heritage, then I think there's a generational issue. And then we do these regional Samvaad events, which I think we do about 10 of them every year. And we go into the Schedule 5, Schedule 6 areas and not in tier 2, tier 3 cities, but we actually go right into forests, right into, where our communities are, and, through the communities host these events where these conversations happen. Then we wanted these key elements of identity that we spoke about. We have programs against each of them. There's a very thriving program on tribal healing. Uh, we're I think we've just this year in 2020 we've just formalized the first ever tribal healers collective of the country. India. It has currently it has 175 tribal healers from 14 states of the country. If you look at the entire Ayush narrative, the allopathic narrative, so much of there's so much emphasis on evidence, whereas that same emphasis doesn't exist in tribal healing practices, local healing practices. There are many people who've been working on it, but we're trying to create a bit of a grassroots movement on that. Handicrafts, artisans, uh, cuisines. I mean, so many of us talk of superfoods and this thing. If you actually unpack the superfoods narrative, it is 80% of the superfoods are indigenous, uh, tribal, are ones which have been fostered by tribal communities. I mean, something like ragi or millet. Millet was the original food of the Gondi, Bhil, Santali communities, and that's where the uh, thing came about. We started working with these cuisines because it feeds very well into the larger narrative, and it's a very core part of identity. We started using the power of cinema. There are some outstanding. I don't know how many of you've seen a movie called Newton, for instance. It's not made by a. It's made by a good friend Amit Bapuskar, but it talks. It has. It talks of Chhattisgarh and democracy and how this works. If you have seen it, I'm sure you liked it. If you haven't, I would very strongly recommend that. But I think using cinema as a means, Rhythms of the Earth is a collective of 80 plus musicians that have been put together, which takes their tribal instruments, tribal sounds. We are currently struggling, honestly. I mean, the musicians are struggling because tribal sounds are typically percussion and wind. There are very few string instruments. So we're trying to put together bridge the gap between, let's say, NCPA in Bombay and grassroots musicians. Then, I mean, there are many ways of heritage conservation. Languages every year currently about 36,000. This year we did about 35,000 odd students who go through 5 tribal language classes. Classes in 5 tribal languages. These are tribal youngsters who are learning their own language. More importantly, we are trying to not just language, which is the oral form, but as languages progress, there are currently under the Samvaad ecosystem there are 11 oral languages for which fonts and dictionaries are being created, and also literature. I mean, which is the strongest manifestation of language, right? When you start writing it. And our effort is to try and get this into the schooling systems, because even now the public schooling system, if a first generation Adivasi child has to learn English, and let's say it's from, let's say, the Betikuruba tribe, then the child first has to learn Hindi or some other mainstream language and then learn English, because a Betikuruba to English bridge does not exist. So, these are small inequities that we're trying to address. And then sports. There are, I think, even when Mr. Muthram was with us, I think there's a lot of emphasis on Kati, Sekor. And these sports are also very, very closely interlinked with, identity and the way of life. There are very strong beliefs around these sports. A lot of you would have seen what has happened with Kabaddi at the national level, which was originally a slightly rustic, informal sport, which has now been sort of converted into a Premier League. We don't want to do a Premier League because then that is again going back into forced mainstreaming probably. But we're trying our best to see what the communities want with each of their sports, and sort of trying to give them direction. We're working with the 36 sports. And finally, sort of youth peer group who is driving positive change. We have a tribal leadership program for which currently we have about 367 alumni. Again, outstanding youngsters who are working on a whole diverse range of issues, from governance to conservation to many, many, many aspects. A Samvaad fellowship, because I think as we are discussing, identity and culture conservation often doesn't really find money, because return on investment is very, very difficult. So I mean, in the whole entrepreneurial space, when you, I mean, this is like pre-seed funding, if you will, and someone has to invest in an idea, even if it fails, and that's what we try and do with the Samvaad Fellowship. There's really no bandish, no boundary in terms of what is a good idea. The only thing we say that you have to be a youngster from the tribe for which you want to work for. You may work for other tribes, but at least you have to do that. And there's some outstanding work that's happening here. As I said, I think the 3 of the dictionaries that I spoke about are being made by our Samvaad fellows. There is Achumse from Meghalaya, who's working on a unique variety of rock salt, which their communities have mined for a long, long time. There is Rothel from Manipur, from the Whistling Village. So, there's a unique, I mean, language, if you will, which is basically purely through whistles that happens, and it's his life's passion to conserve that and to sort of see what he can do with it. All of that, and finally, we are very early stage of setting up something called the Samvaad Action Research Collective, because again, a lot of even today, I think when you see a lot of the government policy, a lot of public policy, a lot of CSR programs, if you will, when with the best of intentions, when they're designed, they often do not capture this the nuance of identity or the nuance of the tribal way of life well enough. That's also because there's not enough that's been written about. So we are funding young researchers who are spending at least 6 months, 1 year on their own ideas, topics, doing research, and then training them on how to write, how to bridge the the snooty academic world and the very practical, grounded tribal community life, and how does one sort of bridge that gap without losing the essence of what you're writing for. And I think there are about 10 people who are writing papers even as we speak, and this is something we hope catches a lot of traction. So sorry if I've taken a lot of your time, but I think this is what I had to say, and very happy to hear any reactions or you want to do it.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thank you, Sourav. That was really thought-provoking. Lovely. Thank you.
Yes.
So, yeah, over to the floor, and we can have some questions for Sourav. I'll put it in the. Mr. Muthuraman, do you want to go first?
Yeah, tell me, Sourav.
So,
Sorry, I'm in mute. Sorry, Sourav. I think you two questions. One is a question. Every year I find, if my statistics is correct, the state governments return the money to this center on the budget that is allocated to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The monies are extremely badly spent, and it's not even spent properly. There are many states in India who spend less than 50% of what has been allocated to them. Why is it happening? Is the government not interested in finding solutions to problems?
So I think a large part of the underspent of what is called the tribal subplan, the one that you're referring to, the TSP budgets. So there's a state and a central component. What happens is it's not that easy to spend large sums of money. When you actually get down to spending, money, it's not. If you go deep into forests, you actually are working where you should. And sometimes the plans don't take that into account. My personal listing is, it's not about whether you're spending 1,000 rupees. It's about even if you're spending 500 rupees, how and what you're spending that on. So that is number one. Number two is, we've realized that, many things which work with tribal India will work at its own pace and will not work at our pace. So sometimes the planning is, we design a very fancy 3-year project, but it doesn't take into account the fact that, I'll give you an example. There are entire public primary healthcare centers that have been built through tribal subplans in scheduled areas, which were built, and the construction was discarded halfway because the ones that were completed got no traction. Okay, so that project was shelved and the money was returned. Whereas the actual thing is, there was absolutely no behavior change component or absolutely no, sort of consultation with the communities. You've gone and built primary healthcare centers without understanding tribal healers. So those are the various issues. Of course, I'm not even getting into the, intent. I just want to, all of you are, most of you are in Bangalore right now, just to also tell you that over the last 4 or 5 years, if you look at RTI information, 20 to 22% of the tribal supply and allocations of Karnataka have actually been invested in the Bangalore metro.
I know I'm referring to events like that.
Correct. So tough one, sir. I think I don't. Of course, there's a little bit of policy inertia, I guess. Spending inertia. But if I were to give everyone a clean check, then I think what I'm saying is probably the issue.
The second thing I wanted to mention to you is I think you should explain to everybody what is meant by Samvaad. Some of us know it, many of us may not know it, and I think you should spend a few minutes on that.
Sure, sir. With your permission, if we can just go through everyone's questions and comments, and if I can just maybe close that out. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
We did see Newton. I really loved it. Very well-made movie, and yeah, it gives you an eye-opener of bringing elections to such a remote, place and how difficult it was. So it was good. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, a couple of years back there was, this piece of news where tribal gentleman Madhu, in Kerala, supposedly one of the most aware and literate states. And this poor man, he just, I guess he shoplifted a few items of food which he wanted to eat. And these people beat him to death. There are videos going around where even before, when he was accosted and this bag was emptied out and they saw these stolen items in his bag, he was so clueless, innocently standing around, submitting to his fate, not even realizing that they're going to actually lynch him, It felt like at least the people over there, the locals and Keralites, mind you, not unaware people, didn't think of him as anything more than an animal, It was very, very distressing. Just wanted to put that out there. And the third thing I wanted to say is, I saw of all these initiatives that you have listed there, and you did say you wanted to encourage indigenous treatment systems of these tribals. But I don't know, maybe you have it already, but I think you should also have a system where, the doctors could actually, you could take us there, run some basic camps, bring them into healthcare. We would be very happy to volunteer, and I'm sure, a lot of us, we just don't have the avenues. We don't know where, how we could bring our expertise to these people. So, yeah, this is what I wanted to say.
So no, thank you so much for that. I can watch Newton any number of times. So to your first one, second, yes, I think Madhu's case, that was in Palakkad in 2018, if I remember right, and I think yes, that was distressing. And the last part on the tribal healers, I just want to, I think would love to try and see if somewhere around Bangalore through our networks, if there are any places where you can volunteer your time if you have networks. Very happy to set that up. But I just, on the tribal healing practices, I just wanted to say one thing, that I think we recognize the fact that this is not a substitute or in conflict with medical practices, the other parties, allopathic medical practices and all of that. We've also sensed some amount of disregard as this is all jadi buti stuff and jadoo tona and that is also true. That's also perception. Our effort on this is two things. If we are doing this from an identity perspective, if there is a community which feels that it is important, then I think we need to accord that importance. That's number one. And number two is even now when we go in, this whole, the whole jadoo tona and jari buti narrative is basically lack of evidence. It's your opinion versus my opinion. And the idea is, how do we create medical evidence, which is where a lot of, as you correctly said, a lot of doctors come in very useful, because someone like me, I would have no competence for the correct research, the correct certifications. So I'm very happy to have a follow-on conversation with you at some point and see what we can do about it.
you should probably get in touch with the community medicine departments and medical colleges and get those researchers and statisticians to, maybe do randomized control trials of the jadi booty. They
That's
would
right.
be the
That's right.
best places to start.
That's right. So the Quality Council of India, QCI, for instance, has started this point of certification of traditional healers. So there, I think they ran into a bit of, just for information, two issues that sort of came up. One was, certification of process versus certification of product. So QCI certifies process, and it's very difficult to certify process, right? So in any sort of, medical intervention. So correct. So that's one. Also, I think the traditional healing community has been it's also passed on from generation to generation. That's how, the wisdom has been passed down, or the knowledge has been passed down. So there's a huge amount of guardedness, because on that we encounter this healers collective that we are talking about. The house is actually divided to, share with you honestly, saying that should we get evidence or should we not get evidence? If we get evidence, then we are sort of, I don't know what's going to happen with it. And it's a consequence of years of insecurity and all of that. So those are practical things that we deal with. But I mean, doesn't take away from the fundamental point that you're making, but it's, that's the reality, and that's why it takes a little time.
Ravi, you're going to say
Right.
something. Yeah.
Saurabh, this is about reservations. Right? I do understand the tribal caste, backward communities are very different. But my question is more at a policy level. Has this evolved from what it was in the earlier years? What is the current thinking? The concern which used to be there, which I think is still there, is there are certain areas where that doesn't work, like for example the doctor's profession, pilots. Now, what is the at the policy level? Is there any new thinking? Is there anything getting implemented? Any changes?
I mean, policy in general or policy on reservations, Ravi? This one.
Reservations.
Policy on reservations. I don't know. The policy on reservation seems to be, going in multiple directions, because, I think one is the whole. So let's look at it at 2-3 levels. One is this concept of, and maybe this argument is not just for, scheduled tribes. This is for reservation in general. I think one is, the concept of Dalit and Adivasi, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. Sometimes these definitions are now being sort of, relooked at slightly. How does one put it? Slightly, loosely. For instance, the last inclusion in the list of scheduled tribes by constitution amendment were the T tribes of Assam. So that now, if you actually anthropologically look at this, the T tribes of Assam were actually not a tribe at all. They were all, settlers from Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, I mean, in and around areas who had gone and settled there. So recognizing them as a tribe, huge amount of sort of strife within the community for which the reservation exists. So that's one thing that's happening. Second, I think many on reservation policy, even within tribes, there are the way it has panned out is that there are certain tribes within scheduled tribes who are, let's just say, who have historically benefited more from reservation than the others. And then don't want to name any specific tribe, but I think we all know, certain caste or a certain tribe who've just, sort of benefited more historically, because I think that it's a question of the initial endowment when reservation started. So that, doesn't seem to get corrected, and there's no way to correct that. So that is why I think the future of reservations, I don't know where it's going. But reservations in general, I don't know. I think it's a little directionless right now, because I think there's gender-based reservation being spoken about. There's economic reservation being spoken about. There's, sociological reservation being spoken about. So I think earlier the concept reservation emanated from the single constitution. Now it is driven by more considerations of multiple ministries. So my honest hand on heart answer to you is I don't know where reservations are going.
No,
I don't even know if reservations are the answer right now.
yeah, I was just wondering because
Yeah, reservation is now fully political. I mean, where's the question? First, the constitution was given for 50 years. 50 years given 70 years become
That's right.
100. And the number of scheduled castes are increasing, scheduled tribes will increase. Fortunately, Saurav, I was very surprised. From 698, it has gone to 705 only. 7 tribes have been added as scheduled tribes. Whereas scheduled castes, I don't know, every day they are adding, I think.
Yeah, I think they're adding one per month or something. Yes, I agree.
When
Anyway,
you
great. I mean, very nice, very revealing. Huh? And what a lot of good work you guys are doing. Congratulations.
You see,
Thank you very much.
Shibu,
yes,
just a comment on reservation. The counter to reservation is a solid, good affirmative action. If we don't practice affirmative action in a proper way throughout the country, then you are inviting reservation in many areas. And as a country, I think we have failed in the affirmative action area. I don't know what is Saurav's view on the subject, and I have been handling this affirmative action subject for many years now. And I always believe that there was a time in 2006, 2007 when the government wanted to do reservations in the private sector. And the CIA went to the Prime Minister and said that, look, we will do affirmative action. We will make sure that people are enabled to compete. People are enabled to become equal. People are assisted to do that. Now, the industry and corporates did not do enough except a few corporates. So unless you have a strong affirmative action plan, it is in some other countries of the world, we are actually inviting reservations, and it will become more and more in the future if we don't do an affirmative action plan properly.
when you talk about maintaining culture and tribal identity, so I think it is kind of can be approached in two ways. One is that the people who belong to that tribe, they themselves have to work to maintain their culture. Like you were saying, somebody was making a dictionary of their language and things like that. But since the number of people involved in, say, that particular tribe is going to be very small, I don't know how successful it is going to be as far as maintaining that particular culture is going to be. Because after a time, for example, the more you get developed, the children, as you educate them, they are going to, in one form or the other, they're going to integrate into the general society. So I don't know how you're going to maintain that integrity and culture by just depending on that group itself. Probably it is more important that other people, non-tribals, are sort of integrated into that tribal. For example, like the Maori tribe of New Zealand, they have that haka dance. So that haka dance is now part of New Zealand culture. It is sort of integrated into the general way of living for all New Zealanders. So for any, for example, when you have a football match or a rugby match, you have a haka dance. So similarly, maybe it is necessary that the rest of the population of India get integrated into different tribal communities of their area, maybe, rather than each tribe trying to protect their own identity, which over a period of time may just be impossible. So I don't know. What do you think of that?
No, Shiva, absolutely. I mean, no disagreement whatsoever on what you're saying. That's one of the reasons why when we set up a program like Samvaad, which is around identity, we were very clear that it has to be a pan-India program. It can't be a Jharkhand program. It can't be a uh, let's work with 10 tribes kind of program. Because as I said, I think so. Yes, actually, just for everyone in the group, also the constitution within scheduled tribes also recognizes something called a PVTG, a particularly vulnerable tribal group. Okay, so there are 75 particularly vulnerable tribal groups in the country, where the total population at the time of writing of the constitution was less than 8,500 across the country, right? So, I mean, the whole purpose of creating a platform for identity is exactly that. Where there's where there's assimilation at a pace at which it's not about our comfort, it's about the comfort for the people who are assimilating. As you said, I mean, you have to. Uh, I mean, no one can tell me what my identity is. It's always for me to discover. And whether the process of discovery takes a month or takes 1 year or 5 years, I really can't have control over that. So for us, I mean, when we run this program, it's difficult because it's very difficult to fit it into quarterly metrics or impact kya hai, or return on investment kya hai, and all that. But the good bit is, I think, I mean, there's a space where we work to do this. And as I said, I think when people come together and sort of meet each other and realize, the biggest learning, the biggest takeaway that we've heard from Samvaad for most people who come here is the fact that they realize that the issues and the challenges are similar across the country. So whether, I mean, if it's a question of language erosion, does not matter if you're a Chaudhary language or the Betakoroba language or somewhere from the northeast, the challenges remain the same. So I think what you're saying is very powerful, and that's the only way to sort of get that. My other worry, I will maybe take a step more than what you were saying. My other worry is in this whole spirit of identity. I mean, this whole question of fostering or strengthening identity. The last thing we want to do is create ghettoization in the country. That's not the direction that this needs to take. And that's always a sort of thin red line that we walk, if you will.
And of course, the problem when you integrate is, whether that identity gets submerged in the larger one, and obviously something is lost in translation, as it were.
That's right.
That worries me always. A couple of questions for you, Sourav. I've loved your talk. Thank you. We learned so much. If 8 to 10% of the population is tribal, don't they deserve to have 8 to 10% of the seats in parliament? Because honestly, power comes only from political power. Okay, so can you form a tribal nation, as it were, to represent themselves at the center? Because that's where they're going to really get power to change things for themselves.
The number of youngsters who we see, who want to do this, who are now realizing that political representation, and the first thing is, I think political representation is not a bad thing. That's the first taboo that they get over. The point that you're making is absolutely correct. Eventually, a lot of the change makers we are working with, or you may be working in any aspect, but this is happening. So there is a Gondwana land party today that is contesting, that will contest elections in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. There is a political party that's being formed in the Nilgiris. Jharkhand and Odisha combined have 2 or 3 political parties, and these regional parties are coming up. Even now in the West Bengal elections that are going on right now, I mean, the first phase, there are political parties in the fray, and I think they will gather steam as they go by. As this thing, and that's one of the things that we work with. I mean, one is forming a political party. Also, I think the pressures of politics are such that they can take you in any direction. It is also about preparing the whoever's going into the political faith, preparing the person. A very good friend and someone who helped conceptualize this piece, Samvaad, gentleman called Biren. He is working on this, and he set up a leadership school for training political aspirants. So Biren and I are working very closely on creating this cohort. Even a lot of our work on leadership and this thing is to get representation at the grassroots levels, because we've also seen that a lot of there's someone called there's a lady by the name of Jyotsna Sitli. Okay, she is the principal conservator of forests for the Himalayan belt, and she's a tribal lady herself. So she's one example of someone who has actually not risen through a grassroots system, but risen through the bureaucracy, feels very strongly for the tribal narrative, and therefore, gone into an area of forest development, etc., which he thinks is core and has influenced her. So we have someone like her at one end, and then we have many other tribal politicians right now who are, they are tribal politicians, but I don't think they're doing much. If that was the case, then the first question that Mr. Muthuraman had asked would not be true, right? The whole TSP allocation. So I think, yes, political parties are being formed, but our sincere hope and effort is to get, people who have the right attitude and aptitude to get into politics, and we will not lose it at the first, pressure, because politics is not getting any easier as we go. Next 2 years. I'm not sure if that answers you, but that's. There's really no answer to this, right?
I was really
Okay,
thinking
Sourav.
of a collective across the whole country, which gives them more power rather than, tiny groups everywhere where they don't really exert any power.
Yeah, so no, there are. I'll send you the links of a few Facebook groups and all of that who are doing this. There is just a lot of the most politically active is Central India on this right now. Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and parts of Maharashtra and Gujarat. And there is an effort to do that. And I think social media is playing a huge role in doing this. Facebook groups where people across the country. And I'll send you a few links to Shivu, and do take a look at that. And I think it's already happening. I just hope it happens well and sticks to the purpose for which it's being done.
Okay, Sourav. Thank you very much
Right.
for this very interesting evening. And we loved your talk and as well as the discussion that followed. So thanks a lot. It's really opened our eyes to a new kind of picture we haven't really looked at. Okay. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Sourav.
Thank you.
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you
sir.
very much. Thank you, sir. And I will just send you some material on Samvaad for your comfortable reading and also some of this information. And let's hope CSK wins today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sourav. That was great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Shivu.